Find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Watch our YouTube channel, Hidden Truth Show. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Here's Jim Breslow.
Welcome back to the Hidden Truth Show. Today we return to our space deep dive as we search for the truth behind the Tic Tac UFOs seen in the Navy videos. One of the more fascinating parts of this story has been the patent that was issued to the Navy for a craft that seems very similar to the craft observed by the Navy pilots and shown in the video. The patent application was filed in April 2016 and was granted by the Patent Office in November 2017, right around the time that the videos surfaced. The inventor is identified as a Navy man, Salvatore Pais. He was a mystery man whom many doubted was even a real person until he surfaced recently answering email questions from the Drive website. There is now a Wikipedia page about him. It states that he is an aerospace engineer and inventor who works at the Naval Air Station Patuxent River. The patent is for a, quote, craft using an inertial mass reduction device, which can travel at extreme speeds. The patent envisions a hybrid aerospace undersea craft which, due to the physical mechanisms enabled with the inertial mass reduction device, can function as a submersible craft capable of extreme underwater speeds. This hybrid craft would move with great ease through air, space, and water mediums. The patent has raised lots of questions. Does it in fact describe viable technology? Why would the U.S. reveal proprietary information in a patent application? Why didn't the U.S. apply for the application to be kept classified? Why did the Patent Office first deny the patent, then change its decision after receiving a letter from the Navy's Chief Technology Officer? Why did the officer claim we would have to pay China for the technology if the patent is denied? Is this a disinformation campaign by our government? Are we trying to pretend that we have something that we do not? Or by stating that the invention is only in development, are we perhaps pretending to not have something that we actually do have? Does the patent make it more or less likely that the Tic Tac UFOs are actually U.S. technology? To answer these questions, we turn to Ryan Cross, a physicist and patent attorney. Cross strongly suspects the patent is part of a U.S. military disinformation campaign. Before we get to the interview, I want to update everyone on former Navy intelligence specialist Mike Turber. We launched this deep dive with our interview of Turber, in which he claimed to have firsthand knowledge that the Tic Tac UFOs seen by the Navy in 2004 are incredible, secret U.S. technology. And he hinted that he, or at least his cell phone, actually rode in one. In this deep dive, we've been investigating the Tic Tacs to try to determine what they are. Are they earthly, extraterrestrial, altered consciousness, phantom technology, or from the future? In the course of the deep dive, we have had many guests come on and scrutinize Turber's claims. He has also received heavy scrutiny and criticism in social media. As I first reported here, we asked Turber to back up his claims by sitting for a lie detector test on our show. He initially agreed to do it. However, we are 2 months down the road and have been unable to schedule this with him. I hold out hope that he will sit for the test or present evidence to back up his claims. Also, don't forget to become a subscriber of our show. You'll get the benefits of special emails, episodes, access to me and a Hidden Truth baseball cap, and most importantly, the good feeling that comes with supporting independent media to fight back against the controlled media. Right now, we have 2 special episodes available for you, and those of you that have been following this deep dive, you're going to especially like them. One is the Daily Star interview of Mike Turber. Listen closely to how he answers those questions as you consider his credibility. And we have the second half of the Jack Sarfati interview, in which he shares details of his Russia connection, provides additional thoughts about the Tic Tac technology, and goes on to provide his theory on the universe. You can listen to both of those episodes on Patreon. You just got to become a subscriber for $5 a month. Go to patreon.com, go to Hidden Truth Show, and become a subscriber for just $5 a month and get access to those special episodes, and we'll get one of those baseball hats sent out to you. Okay, now for our interview with physicist and patent attorney Ryan Cross. What was your broad reaction to the patent?
I mean, if you just look at the patent on the surface, it's not an unusual patent from its layout and stuff. It does have some strange features. You know, for one thing, the background's almost twice as long as the description of the invention. One of the reasons that is they put a lot of the theory of how it works in the background, which is a surprising place to put that. I would expect it in the description of the actual invention. The other thing is you've only got 4 claims in the whole application. That's all it was filed with. Normally, for something, especially on this, where you're not seeing a lot of art, there's not a crowded area, you would expect that they take full advantage of the 20 claims allowed by the patent office without imposing additional fees. And you just don't have that here. You have 4 claims. You don't even have some of the obvious aspects that you would want to include in there, like that the inner wall is insulated. You don't see that in a claim. So there's some oddballs there, but nothing totally out of line.
Well, let's start with your comment about there's being so much in the background, and you would have put that into what, the description?
Yeah, the description of the invention, because you're really talking the basis of how the invention's supposed to work. To
and
extent,
do you think there's
that's good theory?
Is there any reason you think they may have done it that way, or just not the best lawyering, or what?
I don't know what their thought was. I mean, in a way, it's theory that was already out there, so it is background. But usually, since it's directly affecting what you're saying is how the invention operates, you would go ahead and put that in the description because that's what you're taking advantage of. Background is usually, here's what's been done before. And none of this is really what's been done before as far as an apparatus like this.
Do we know who the attorney was that wrote this?
Well, it's on the cover. Attorney agent firm is Marco Glut. NewCAD, I don't really know him, but
is he with the Navy, or it looks like he's private practice?
I did not look into that. I'll be honest.
And
I wouldn't. It could be either. I don't know how the Navy does its patents.
So let's talk about government patents for a second.
Okay.
This seems kind of an odd thing to me. I hadn't really ever delved into this before, that the U.S. government can patent things. Is the U.S. government treated just like any private individual or company when it comes to being able to patent things?
Yeah, certainly the various arms of the government can patent things just like any individual can. Generally, the government's restricted on what it can do as far as copywriting information. So you'll see on some of the documents that they put out that it's, that no copyright is claimed, but as far as patents, they can. They can through the Department of Energy, through the Navy and stuff. They do obtain patents.
And to get a patent issued, I think this is one of the biggest questions that pertain to this. How viable does the invention have to be?
Okay. The patent has to work. Now, in the prosecution, they quote something that says that, that it can be patented. Yeah, a case where it says it can be patented even though it doesn't work. But what they're really saying in that case they're referring to is that the applicant doesn't have to prove that it works. He just has to prove that the foundation for it is firm and that people skilled in the art would pretty much know that this is something that will work. I'm not quite sure that falls in this area. Now, the other side of that is, although it has to work, it doesn't have to work well. There's nothing in patenting that says that there is going to be any kind of level of performance, any kind of economical level. So, you occasionally see something that says so good it's patented. Well, the patent's not an indication of the merit. It's just an indication that it's an invention and it has a useful aspect. And so even this, even if it didn't work to do exactly what they said, as long as it had some function, you could claim that it was useful and had utility and therefore could be patented. The question raised by the examiner and the question that comes up from this is whether it's enabled. And that is not whether it'll work, but whether anybody could build it based on what's disclosed in this patent. And really, you're looking at one skilled in the art, but still, you have quite a few holes, I think, as far as being able to build it.
So, from a legal perspective, when it comes to viability, what is the legal standard in order to get a patent issued?
Okay, so like I said, it has to be in an area that you think it's going that either you can prove that it works or that it reasonably should work. And other than that, it has to be disclosed so that one skilled in the art could build it without what's called undue experimentation. So if they have to spend a lot of time developing stuff, it's not really there. In this case, what the patent examiner pointed out had to do with the EMN field and said, no, the largest EMN field is much less than what you're saying you need in here. The largest EMN field ever built, magnetic field ever built, and so nobody skilled in the art knows how to build an EM field that accomplishes this. They replied with certain documents, and that's kind of an odd aspect because they replied with publications by the inventor that occurred after the filing date of this. Strictly speaking, even if those enabled the invention and showed that an EMN field could build, since they were documents after the filing date, they could not enable this invention. They would have had been documents before the filing date because one skilled in the art wouldn't have known about those documents at the time that the invention was filed. You have got other holes there too, like the material of construction. They claim the inner wall and the outer wall for this chamber, and I believe your guest recently, a physicist,
Jack Sarfati?
Jeff Sarfati was talking about that when he was talking about some metamaterials that could be used for this, but then indicated that the exact material that would be needed for this had not been made yet and would require a lot of experimentation to make. The fact that they don't disclose any material that can be used for it, they don't point out any kind of material, and from Jeff, we get the material that could be used hasn't been developed would kind of imply that this hasn't been enabled from a undue experimentation standpoint.
So you agree with Sarfati's comment that this invention would require metamaterials?
I haven't looked into the physics that deeply. I would be surprised that you could build the chamber and get this result out of a normal material. What Jeff Sarfati was saying as far as needing a certain index of refraction and stuff made a lot of sense, but I have not gone back to look at the real hard science on it.
And sounds like, based on your review of the patent, you're somewhat surprised that the government was able to get it issued. I
am somewhat surprised. I think the examiner had good arguments that it wasn't enabled. As I said, they came back with arguments, but part of their arguments were based on documents that would enable it that shouldn't have been considered. And then apparently the letters from the Navy, the declaration and letter from the Navy, which in itself is kind of an interesting document.
Oh, yeah. We're going to go through. I want to go through that letter with you. This is the letter dated December 15th of 2017, where it's the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer of the Navy, that makes a direct appeal to the patent examiner who was on the verge, I guess, of denying the patent, and he writes just a one-page letter. That would it appear from your review of the file that this was the letter that turned things around?
Well, you don't know. It was on appeal. What happens is the examiners reviewed the application at that point. He makes a rejection. The applicant has a chance to respond, amend the claims if he wants. They did not amend the claims. Use lots of times after that either an allowance or a final rejection. In this case, it was a final rejection on the same basis that the invention was not enabled. They appealed that. At that point, the examiner can either change his mind, which is what he did, and allow the case, or he can file a response to that reply brief, an examiner's answer, and it can go forward to appeal. Usually what happens, as I understand it, is the examiner will go in and talk to his supervisor about the case and whether they want to go ahead and appeal. You're looking at this, and this letter, if I was the examiner, would not move me off my basis.
So, to be clear, the examiner, up until the point of the letter, was saying that this patent is not enabled. And to be clear, when you say is not enabled, saying that it would still take too much experimentation to be able to actually create this.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So what in the letter by the CTO would have told this patent examiner that, oh, it's more enabled than I had given it credit for?
I'm not clear on that. The first line of the letter includes that the CTO says, I agree with your main point, the examiner's main point, that this mode of acceleration/movement is beyond the state of the possible, at least at the present.
Should that, if something is beyond the state of the possible at the present, should that in and of itself be grounds for rejecting a patent application?
It would depend kind of what I meant on that. It might be that it would take so much energy to do it that it could be done, but it would just not be financially feasible or practical to carry it out, in which case that would not be around a basis for denying the patent. But given that, it starts out with Dr. Pais has shared your views of his patent disclosure, and I agree with your main point, it kind of implies that somebody skilled in the art could not produce the electromagnetic field without undoing experimentation, that it would be beyond what's currently possible without a lot of work, which would say it's not enabled.
Yeah, so the CTO is making an admission there that was damaging to his chances, but then later in the letter he says, regarding Pais the inventor, he is currently 1 year into the project and has already begun a series of experiments to design and demonstrate advanced high-energy density, high-power propulsion systems. Tell me if you find that significant.
Well, I might, but the next sentence is, if the desired results are not achieved due to the sample's charge, he will move to using a supercapacitor as the spinning test asset. So he's still experimenting with this. He's still trying to figure out how to do it. Mm-hmm. So he kind of indicates that Dr. How do you say that, Pais? Anyway, that he's still experimenting with it, that he hasn't hammered it out yet.
Right.
And if you go up to the paragraph above that, it also talks about Dr. Pais's experiments, but it says, again, if successful, the realization of this result demonstrates that this patent documents the future state of the possible and moves propulsion technology beyond gas dynamics, blah, blah, blah. Once again, it's if successful. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of this letter that says that nothing's been tested and carried out, and that it still is going to require a lot of testing to figure out exactly how to do it.
Yeah, I had that line highlighted that says, as far as describing what they're trying to achieve, and that is something that, quote, moves propulsion technology beyond gas dynamic systems to field-induced propulsion-based hybrid aerospace undersea craft. I mean, first of all, that's pretty stunning statement. But if I'm understanding that correctly, they're talking about inventing something where gas-powered engines would no longer exist.
They're talking about the exact same thing as in the patent, an inertialess mass drive that can operate under gravity and inertia principles.
Yeah, pretty stunning potential invention here, though, right? Something that's going to replace the gas engine, and presumably all craft would use this type of new propulsion system.
I think replacing all craft is probably a little beyond what's going to happen. Assuming it worked exactly and they could implement it, replacing all craft anytime soon would be beyond what you would think, kind of beyond the pale. But certainly the type of movement you'd be talking about with inertialess drive would open all sorts of possibilities. If you can have astronauts in there that are not subject to inertia, then you don't have to worry about acceleration speeds, which you have to worry about now on craft, because the human body is only going to take so much acceleration. So you can potentially get to places at amazing speeds, and it opens a world of possibilities.
And based on your physics background, do you have any assessment of this? Does this seem past the smell test to you?
The dreamer in me always likes to think that, we can get to a place where we are basically manipulating gravity. The practical part of me says there's a lot of hurdles, and I have a hard time believing that right now we are at a state where we can manipulate it well enough to really make a craft that does this.
Mm-hmm. And I think I said it this way to Jack, and I think you said I was saying it right, Jack Sarfati. Am I correct that the concept here is a craft that creates its own gravitational field that has the effect of negating the Earth's gravitational field?
I would not think it would be really so much negating it. It's just generating a different gravitational field around itself. So within there, you may not feel the effects of the Earth's gravity because of the gravitational field it creates. Of course, Earth's gravity field would still be there. So to some extent within the ship itself, you would be negating it, but you wouldn't. It's not like the Earth's field wouldn't still be all around the craft. And basically it would be creating a field before it and maybe potentially behind it, so as to manipulate the space and inertia to move.
Gotcha. So it creates kind of a zero gravity field around it, right? And then how does it propel itself, if you could describe that in layman's term based on your review of the patent?
Well, if you're falling under the effects of a gravitational field, the Earth's gravitational field. So it's not inconceivable that if you can make no field, you can make some kind of positive field ahead of it, which basically sucks the craft in the direction it's heading.
Fascinating. That's the first.
It's just kind of falling forward.
Okay, a light bulb just kind of went on in my head the way you just described that. So, just like you can fall to Earth, the Earth's gravitational pull is sucking you to Earth. The gravity force can pull you forward or backwards, etc.
Yeah, just wherever you're creating the pool of the gravity field, it would be falling that direction.
Now, there's a maximum speed by which you can fall. I don't know what they call that or what that number is. Do you know?
32 feet per second.
Well, it's the terminal velocity. Maximum speed you can fall in at Earth, and that's basically due to air friction. So potentially, I don't know how this gravitational field interacts with air, and that is an interesting component. There might be some maximum speed within the atmosphere you can go just because of however it interacts with air and friction.
Does that mean in thinner air you can fall faster?
Yes. If the Earth had no atmosphere and you were falling, then you would continue to gain speed until you splatted into the Earth. As it is, you start encountering air friction, and that stops you from gaining just velocity until you hit. At some point, you're at the maximum velocity you can get because the air is pushing you back up.
Mm-hmm. But isn't the air thinner the higher in the atmosphere?
Yeah.
So does that mean that terminal velocity varies? If you jump out of a plane at 30,000 feet, do you fall faster, when you're higher up and start slowing down as you get closer to Earth?
I haven't looked at the exact speeds, but generally what's going to happen is you're going to keep gaining speed until you get enough atmosphere that it's going to eventually bring you to a stop. If you're going too fast, the air could start slowing you down at that point.
Mm-hmm. So does that concept apply when you talk about, we'll just call it the Tic Tac, this potential invention, moving around? If it's creating its own gravity, would there, but yet it is traveling through air, does that mean there'd be a limit on the speed of this and that it would be limited by terminal velocity?
Potentially. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know off the top of my head how that gravitational field interacts with the air.
Well, I guess the other issue, too, is the Earth has X amount of gravity. What is that? That's one G?
Yeah, 1G.
So
about 32 feet per second acceleration.
If something had 1,000 G, would that cause an object to head toward it that much faster?
Yeah, with the greater gravitational field, you will get greater acceleration.
Okay, and higher speeds ultimately.
Mm-hmm. That's why on the moon, they do that kangaroo hop and fall back slowly because the moon has substantially less mass. It has less gravitational field.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's where you get virtually unlimited speed potential depending on how many G's you create with this craft.
Exactly. But then the question arises, does that gravity you're generating ahead of you, that kind of field, how that interacts with the air, because presumably the air right outside of it's going to be attracted by that, how it interacts with other particles.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go back to one. Let's go back to one other thing in the letter, where he essentially concludes: China is already investing significantly in this area, and I would prefer we hold the patent as opposed to paying forever more to use this revolutionary technology. Is that really an accurate statement? If the U.S. government has a patent on this, can we use that against China and vice versa?
Well, the thing is, a U.S. patent is granted by the U.S. government, and it's only going to apply to activities in the United States. Similarly, a Chinese patent is issued by the Chinese government. It only applies to activities in China. If the Chinese government wants to enforce a patent on technology in the U.S., they have to get a U.S. patent to it. There's various treaties in operation, so that if they file one in China, they could then file one in the U.S. But ultimately, you've got the government involved, and, if it really becomes a national security aspect, they're going to just invalidate that patent if it's really truly important for national security. Or they're not going to grant it in the first place. They'll slap a security risk on it as soon as it comes in, and it'll languish forever. So, if the Chinese get a U.S. patent, then people in the U.S. they can enforce it against people in the U.S. They can't. It's not a matter of paying forever because patents have a 20-year lifetime from date of filing, so it's not forever. And like I said, if it's truly gets to an important area like this that would be national security, I don't think the Chinese would ever get a patent allowed here.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't think we'd ever get a patent allowed in China on it.
This statement that he makes at the end is really a naive statement. I mean, the U.S. isn't potentially subject to paying China for this technology if China develops it first.
Yeah, and in the course of normal circumstances, I would say yes. If the Chinese got a patent under the U.S. system, people, including the U.S. government, would be obligated to pay for use under the patent. However, as a practical aspect, when you get to something like this that is such a military and security issue, the patent, it is overstated because the patent would never get issued if it's really viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there would have to actually be a Chinese patent that was pending that's competing with this one, which he's not referring to that.
And we're now a first-to-file system, so presumably anything the Chinese file directly on this now would be subject to this patent.
Okay, what about the fact that the Navy itself has video of something that appears to be what is being described in this patent, and this video goes back to 2004. It's my understanding that you have to file a patent within X period of time. I think it's a year. You can correct me. Within a year of discovery.
That's more or less right with certain qualifications. Really, that's if you do certain activities. If you publish it, if you offer it for sale, etc., then you have a year period to get the patent. If you make it, use it, see it's viable, and don't do any kind of commercial activity with it, arguably you could wait longer to file your patent as long as you don't run any of the bar triggering things like publication or offer for sale.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop you there because that's fascinating. So you're saying it's possible. I know it all sounds crazy, but this whole thing is pretty crazy. It's possible that the U.S. Navy could have been flying them around in 2004 on a test basis and then decides to patent it in forget when these were filed, 2017 initially, something like that. And theoretically, that would be okay. They as long as they didn't make commercial use of it, they could be okay filing for something years later.
They could potentially, as long as all that, pretty much qualified as testing it and development. Yeah, they could wait. They could wait the 10, 15 years to file it.
Of course, you've got an inherent contradiction because you've got the CTO saying we're testing this, whereas in 2004 they were actually flying it.
Yeah, and I suppose potentially they could have started testing in 2004 and still be testing and perfecting it, and have filed in the in-between time because they think at that point it's viable. Then you do have the question of A, why did they file the patent? Why did they really want to tell people what they were doing? And B, why didn't they enable it more so that they had a stronger patent that they were issuing?
Yeah, so let's touch on that first question. What is your thinking regarding the fact that the Navy was willing to openly disclose all this in this patent? And isn't it correct that you can file a patent under some type of confidentiality so that it's not seen by the public?
You can file the patent application under a non-publication request so that the application's not seen. Eventually, if the patent issues, it gets published and it is seen. You can't keep it confidential after issuance.
Okay, I never knew that. Okay. So bottom line, if you want the thing issued, it's going public at that point.
Yeah.
And sorry,
Issuance.
do we know, did they apply initially to keep this protected?
I did not see that in there, but I did not directly look at the prosecution history to see if they requested non-publication.
Okay, so that's...
I know that would standardly be granted, and it was published as an application, so it does not appear that they requested it.
Now, that's kind of weird, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, and the whole thing could be, more or less a red herring to redirect people's attention here while they're doing something else.
Yeah. Is the government known to do that?
It's the government. They do what they think they can.
I mean, and if that is going on, might that also be an explanation for how this patent examiner working for the U.S. Patent Office changes direction in response to a letter from the CTO from the Navy, where the letter really didn't provide any strong basis for granting it beyond what was already submitted, yet he turns around?
It could be. I mean, from the examiner's standpoint, he may not want to get in bad with somebody higher up on the government food chain than he is. B, if the government really wants the patent to issue, and, from his standpoint, if it's not enabled, it's probably never really a problem because nobody's ever going to do anything under the patent that's going to cause the patent to be litigated or anything.
Yeah.
If nobody can actually make the invention, then nobody can get sued for infringement. It never becomes an issue.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly seems like if it was Joe Schmo creating this in his garage versus the U.S. Navy backed by a letter from the chief technology officer of the Navy talking about the national security needs of this vis-a-vis China, that the patent office is going to treat one a little bit differently than the other, even though it shouldn't.
It shouldn't, but, that's the reality of things.
So as you look at this, is that kind of where your head is going on it, that this is essentially disinformation campaign?
It could be. I did kind of look up the inventor on it. He has several other patents. One also got basically a rejection based on not being enabling, and did eventually get issued. Another one also got a rejection on not being enabling and was eventually abandoned. So, he has a few other patents. I did not see that they got the same kind of, one still pending and hasn't been examined, and I didn't see anything in the others that kind of went down this same rabbit hole.
And one of them had pertained to this whole room temperature nuclear reactor. What was it? Superconductors.
Superconductor.
Was that the one that was Was that the one that was granted?
Let me see if I made note of that real quick.
That certainly seemed to be the most interesting of the others. I know there was also
It seemed to be the most interesting, but I believe that was the one that was abandoned.
Mm-hmm. Is it your understanding? What's the relationship between that and the Tic Tac craft? This type of room temperature superconductor energy.
Sorry, to back up a little bit, I believe it was the one on microwave generation that was granted, and the one on superconducting was abandoned after the rejections. The microwave generation falls right into this one as far as generating the microwaves needed and the ENM field for producing this. The superconductor is probably a little less related, but I could certainly see that it would fit in with trying to make a system that's going to have very high ENM fields and stuff in an economical manner, because certainly anything you can do to get down resistance is going to make such processes more economical and more viable.
Mm-hmm. And this whole room temperature semiconductor, I just read something as I was preparing that the highest temperature superconductor was operating at negative 70 degrees Celsius, and that this would really be revolutionary to be able to have it more at room temperature. I don't understand that at all. So are you able to explain the significance of doing something at room temperature versus negative 70 degrees and how significant of an invention that would be for the world?
Oh, yeah. Well, superconductor, basically when you get to a lot of machinery, a lot of equipment, when you get to monorails that float by ENM and go by ENM pulses, the limiting part in that is the fact that electricity running through a wire has resistance, kind of like the resistance of rubbing your hand across the table. It slows it down, it dissipates the power and the energy in there over long distances. When you get to superconductor, you're basically talking something that doesn't have that resistance. So it's conducting all that electricity without losing virtually no power. So it suddenly makes everything more efficient. It makes it easier to create those magnets that are going to lift the monorail and do it over long distance. And so the trouble is, if you have to have it at minus 70 to do that, it's not very practical to keep a whole monorail at minus 70 over a long distance. If you can do it at room temperature, suddenly it becomes much more practical.
Mm-hmm. And then same thing goes then for a craft that would be flying like the Tic Tac?
Yeah, same thing goes for there. You wouldn't have necessarily the long distance, but you get other effects from superconductors that you can do, and all that is easier when you don't have to maintain a refrigeration system to keep it cold.
So this is kind of a holy grail of energy production. And are we talking, this is considered nuclear energy?
Well, superconductor wouldn't be nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, or at least as you're talking nuclear fusion, has to do with basically doing what the sun does to generate its light and heat. And you're doing that in a controlled environment. To do that, though, the modern theories would say that you need ENM fields to contain the nuclear reaction, because you're not going to have steel or other equipment that's going to be able to contain the heat and the energy releasing. So the idea is that you could do that with magnetic fields. That's where the superconductors come in, because they could generate the kind of magnetic fields you need to instigate the nuclear fusion.
Mm-hmm. And again, this room temperature concept is the holy grail. Is that a good way of putting it? And there's tons of...
Yeah, as far as these materials go, what you want is a room temperature superconductor. That would get your names in the books and would revolutionize quite a few things.
Mm-hmm. And this guy, Salvatore Pais, if that's how we're not sure how to pronounce it either, but we think it's Pais. Does he seem to have the intellectual chops and background to be the guy who came up with this?
I don't know. I don't know him personally, and I haven't reviewed his papers. I've reviewed this one patent. I've kind of looked around at the other patents, but the trouble with patents you really want to go to is technical papers. The trouble with patents is they are usually whatever the inventor said channeled through a patent attorney. So the patent attorney is drafting this based on what he's told. The inventor reviews it. So you've got a bit of a distance there. He espouses, he talks well in there. Whether it's all accurate, that's a complete scientific study that I haven't undertaken.
So perhaps to kind of sum it up, and then Michael may have a question for you. But to sum it up, what we see in these videos that have been released from 2004 and 2015, I assume you've seen some of the videos or generally aware of them. I mean, I am correct to say that is essentially kind of what is being described by Pais in this patent.
Certainly, that would be one explanation for what's out there. I mean, what's in the videos. It would be something that this kind of craft would be able to behave like. Quick turns, quick movements, quick acceleration.
And going underwater.
Potentially underwater. Again, I would, my only question surrounds there is how the gravitational field interacts with the water, whether you really truly avoid a frictional element there or still have it, so you might be more limited underwater. That doesn't necessarily mean it can't be used underwater, but ultimately, where you're going to get the biggest benefit is out in space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again to Ryan Cross. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.